Welcome back. All right, so I want to talk about rules. Yep. So we're a few weeks away from the start of the preseason, which means that's when we start seeing complaints about officiating. Those complaints get louder during the regular season, after the trade deadline, louder still, and then in the playoffs, almost deafening, and they reach deafening stage once you reach the Stanley Cup final. Every single penalty gets completely and totally torn apart with where they missed this and what else they didn't call and why did they call this, and clearly they hate insert name of team here. Now, the Champions Hockey League, a European league, and really honestly a league that doesn't get a lot of attention. They may get more attention this year to see how these rule changes turn out. These rule changes were announced last week, so I've got some rules underneath here, underneath the purple line. These are ones I want to talk about that I personally have an opinion on, but I like these. I like these changes, and these are ones that we've talked about before. A power play lasts a full 2 minutes. So if you score 6 seconds into the power play, you're still on the power play. You're on the power play until the end of the 2 minutes. Now, this is a rule the NHL had before. It went away because the Montreal Canadiens could score 3 or 4 times in 2 minute power plays. So because it was unfair that Montreal was scoring so often on the power play, the NHL changed the rule. It's just like in the 80s when they did away with the offsetting penalties because the Edmonton Oilers loved 4-on-4, so they had no problem with multiple 4-on-4 situations per game. So the NHL decided they're having too much fun with 4-on-4. Let's end that rule about the offsetting penalties. So now, of course, you see a penalty for each team. It's 4-on-4. Back then, penalty for each team, it stays 5-on-5. So that was a rule change made because one team was gaming it. Now, when you talk about this and this kind of a rule change, if the NHL did this, what would people complain about? Well, how many more goals are the Oilers going to get? It would be interesting, too, because, of course, the number one insult towards the Oilers seems to be that, well, 5-on-5, they don't get nearly as many. Look at that. Their power play drags them there. But it's a great power play. And, of course, the argument then would be, well, that's not fair because the Oilers then are going to score X amount more goals per season. And, yeah, they would. And it would definitely make teams play a little more scared against Edmonton, right? How many times have we heard, well, he drags that guy down, but it's a good penalty to take because, he prevented a goal there. Might change if we had a full 2 minutes of a power play guaranteed. Also, delayed penalty, doesn't matter. If you score during a delayed penalty, it's still a power play. I'm fine with that too. Honestly, I think that's kind of a fun rule change. It might make teams a little more desperate when they're playing a man down. During a delayed penalty to get that turnover because they know they could allow 2 goals for that one play rather than one. And this one's my favorite of the 3. A shorthanded goal nullifies a power play. Love it, love it, love it. There have been times over the last couple of years with all the games I've been watching where a team will allow a shorthanded goal and then they come back and they score on the power play. And so we're like, well, that nullified, the shorthanded goal. The shorthanded goal was great. But how much more intense could some of the penalty kills be if they know if we get a shorthanded goal here, we nullify the power play? Which brings me back to the Oilers. The Oilers shorthanded can be quite dangerous. They have some pretty good penalty killers there. They could absolutely turn their penalty kill up a little bit. So your penalty kill numbers get better if you have a good shorthanded situation scoring-wise. So I think those rules are great. Now, at the NHL level, one rule that I've said I would change, because I always get the, if you were commissioner, what would you change? I'd get rid of the instigator. I don't think it's necessary anymore. There's so little fighting in the game now compared to where it was. And if you do away with the instigator, it's not going to come up by that much. It really isn't. Plus, it's not called that consistently. The instigator has been called at points where I'm like, I don't know that was instigating. And then vice versa, where a guy will just grab another guy and just start pummeling him. It's like, where's the instigator penalty? And then sometimes the excuse is, well, there's only 5 minutes left and it's a tie game, so they're not going to call the instigator there. I'm going to come back to that. But yeah, I do think that the instigator rule, I don't think it's necessary anymore. I understood why it was brought in when it was, but we're not going to go back to a league where there's a lot of enforcers. And so, outside of guys like Nick Delorier, Ryan Reeves, and whatnot, you're not going to see them going out and deciding, well, now there's no instigator, I'm going to fight a bunch more. I really don't think that's going to happen either. Standard. So the next thing I want to talk about is the standard for suspensions, and I don't want it to be related to injury. And here's why. Because there are a lot of times where somebody doesn't get hurt, and it'll be, well, the NHL looked at that, but there was no resulting injury on the play, and so instead of having a hearing or doing the fine that they normally would, they figure it's okay, and then other times it's considering the injury on the play. The injury shouldn't matter. it should be the intent. And so if a player throws a hit that's really bad and late, but the other player just bounces right back up and skates off, that shouldn't have anything to do with it, because the player may not have gotten up and skated off, and that exact same hit thrown in another game may result in an injury. So the exact same hit thrown by two different players should have the same standard applied to it. And this is the same of slashing, same of everything. And it should not matter if it's a star player. It should not matter if it's a fourth liner. If it's a guy who just called up from the AHL, the rules should be applied the same across the board. If it's a 3-game suspension against Nick Delorier, it's a 3-game suspension against Connor McDavid. And that should be the standard that's applied all across. And they should have that clarity. I think when Brendan Shanahan did the explanations he did, I think having George Peros out there and doing the same explanation videos like Shanahan used to would be a nice addition as well. I would get rid of the trapezoid. So the trapezoid came in, and I understand there's going to be people who say, no, keep the trapezoid. But it was that goaltenders would just come out of the net and fling the puck out, so you couldn't dump and chase. Dump and chase hockey is still there, but it does feel like it's more common now for teams to carry the puck across the zone, because we understand that puck control is everything. So dump and chase means you're giving up the puck, and that's not the optimal situation for any team. You're giving up the puck, and now you've got to go get it again. So dump and chase is not as prominent as it was. There are still goaltenders who come out and clear the puck. The trapezoid rule to me is, it's I understand why it was there. I don't think it's made a huge difference to the game. I know there are people who will argue with me that it did, but goalies can still come out and just get it before it hits that line. They can also get it when it comes outside of that line. It's a small area of the ice that's really actually preventing goaltenders from coming out and playing it. And as I've mentioned before too, how many times have we seen a goalie come out and play the puck and hand it off to the other team? It happens. Get rid of the trapezoid, you're going to have more roaming from the goaltenders, and you may very well see more goals scored as a result. Of course, the one thing too with goalies coming out and playing it there is when we had touch icing, there was no touch whistles. It was also, I think, preventing injuries, where you weren't getting those races for the puck as often. I do think it was preventing injuries there. Also, with the standard for suspensions, I'd like to see the rules called exactly the same all year. I don't care if it's the beginning of the preseason. I don't care if it's the regular season. I don't care if it's the playoffs. I want the rules called the same way all year. And I want players to know this is the standard. Players will adapt. The helmet off rule, right? And this is one that people were really upset about a couple years ago. People still get upset, but the players have definitely adapted. As soon as that helmet comes off, they know either they get the helmet back on or they leave the ice. They are much faster about leaving the ice now than they were a couple years ago when that rule change was made. And it does feel like that adaptation happened, and we're seeing fewer instances where a player has his helmet knocked off, and while he's skating off and you're waiting for his replacement to come out, the other team scores a goal. That's very rare in the NHL. Doesn't happen that often. And so I think calling rules the same all year, we'll see players adapting to that as well, whether it's slashing, hooking. And again, I remember when the game was slowed way down by all the clutching and grabbing and hooking. And now you don't see that nearly as much. Skill rules the day. So I don't see any reason why calling the rules standard across the board would cause any problems, because again, it's not like we're seeing those calls that weren't being made in the early 2000s that were slowing the game down. We aren't seeing tons of penalties for obstruction because players changed the way they were playing the game, and certain players just ended up out of the league. Without the obstruction, they could not play their position anymore, and they were out of the league. And the video review for puck over glass. So Colin Campbell, the last time he was talked to about this, he said, well, we don't necessarily have the cameras in the best spot. Sometimes it's hard to tell, but there are too many instances where we as fans at home, announcers calling the play and showing the replays, can see that the wrong call on the ice was made. And I thought it was really telling too that coming out of those GM meetings where some of the GMs were saying this should be, reviewable, that the penalties for puck over glass should be reviewable. And I think it was Stephen Walkham that came out and said, it's only happened a couple times all year. And within a week, we saw at least, I want to say 4 or 5 missed calls with puck over glass. It is not something that should take that long to review, and you want to get the calls right. So I am fine with expanding video review. I know there are people who don't like that idea, but we've seen rule changes help to really amp up the league's visibility and their profitability. Major League Baseball this year has seen an increase in attendance. And there's a debate about whether or not it's that baseball teams there's more teams that are better, there's more teams in the hunt for a playoff spot. But fans seem to be of the mind that the game was changed. They changed the rules so the game got a lot faster. We're not seeing 5-hour baseball games. And so people are more likely to go out to a baseball game knowing it won't take the next week and a half to finish watching it. And I think if the NHL makes the right rule changes, you're going to see an increase in viewership, and you might see an increase in attendance as well. And definitely the power play moves here by the Champions Hockey League. That's fun. I like that. I think that's great. They changed their playoff format a little bit between their leagues as well, but we'll see how that all turns out. And of course, playoff format's a whole other discussion for another time. I just wanted to talk about the rules, and yeah, get the referee's jersey on, because why not? But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What rule would you change in the National Hockey League? One thing that I've always found is weird, I didn't put it on the board because I don't know if I would change the rule necessarily or not, but penalty for a hit to the head being 2 minutes. I always thought it should be at least a double minor, if not a major. If you decide a player has hit a player in the head and that was the primary point of contact and that they did it on purpose and it warrants a penalty, then to me, that should be a little more than 2 minutes, considering CTE and concussions and the fact that they keep shortening careers. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.